Welcome into the Locked On Wolves postcast. We are live following the Minnesota Timberwolves overtime loss to the Utah Jazz by a final score of 132 to 126. Time for Marty Gellner and I to break it all down and share our key takeaways from the game. The Locked On postcast starts now.
You are Locked On Wolves postcast, part of Locked On Sports Minnesota. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beacon. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. I'm joined by Marty Gellner of Bally Sports North to break down the Timberwolves loss to the Jazz, overtime loss to the Jazz in Game 2 of the season. We're going to get into some key takeaways here right off the bat. Marty, much of this game felt pretty eerily similar to the opener against Oklahoma City, albeit with more action down the stretch, going to overtime, a lot more excitement, I think, in general. But there were a lot of similarities. What's your biggest takeaway from this one?
Yeah, probably. And you're right. The similarities were there. You can again, just like on Wednesday against OKC. The Wolves were not good enough to. And Minnesota even had to work to force against the Jazz, and disappointing to see the team come out with that, but they kind of played the piece and got away with it on Wednesday. Did not get away with it tonight again.
Yeah, my key takeaway in this one is that really for the Timberwolves, all four of their best players, right, the big four, all played well in this game. In general, there were just some struggles here and there for most of them. Like Karl-Anthony Towns' foul trouble, his first four fouls in this game were all kind of cheap fouls. I think there was one offense, maybe two offensive fouls mixed in, but they were kind of those unnecessary fouls that he didn't, putting his team in a tough spot, having to sit at key moments in the game. And parts of that second half when the Wolves were struggling to stay afloat, Rudy Gobert missing some bunnies at the rim, missing some key free throws down the stretch in overtime, I guess it was. And then Anthony Edwards had a great game too, but he had some defensive issues late in regulation. There were a couple screens he couldn't get through to contest 3-pointers by the Jazz. And then he had I think consecutive turnovers in overtime when it was a 1-possession game. So each of those players all had great moments, and they all had some head scratching moments in this one too. I mean, you look at the box score and it's like, oh, those guys all played really well, but there were stretches that were just, really, I guess sloppy is maybe the easiest way to put it.
Yeah, that's and you mentioned Anthony Edwards. He had in overtime actually took eight shots. Wolves as a team took 8 of them, and one of the things was that the ball got slaughtered in overtime and plagued the Wolves a little bit last season. Have, as you said, Ben, these really impressive game balance. Then at the time it matters, that same kind of especially in overtime.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess my other thing in this one, my other, I guess, major takeaway is the Jazz had 50 3-point attempts in this game. The Wolves only attempted 33 threes. And the Wolves were the team that attempted the most threes per game of any team in the NBA last season. The biggest reason that the Jazz were so three happy, I think, is they were trying to spread the floor against the Wolves. They were trying to, make Gobert and Towns play on the perimeter. And also, we talked about this after the first game, the loss to the Thunder on Wednesday, that it generates kind of higher variance rebounds, right? Longer rebounds. It just, more things can happen when you're an undersized team playing against a team like the Wolves that have 2 7-footers. And Utah just had a significant advantage outside the arc. Kelly Olynyk I think was like 5 of 6 from 3 or something crazy. And Jordan Clarkson had a big game, but the disparity in terms of 3-point attempts and makes was definitely a big issue in this one.
It was huge, and Utah thing in the opener against, and it was something that was on the Wolves' radar. Out of wide open looks to open Wednesday night on opening night, so it just isn't something we were paying any attention. Definitely part of one of the points of emphasis in the game. That part is disappointing. There are areas of this game where you just kind of assist at one point. It's gotten doubled up in assists for 10-2 in favor of times, something like 5-1. It just was like not, especially that team kind of, it is such a different roster, set of passes, but defending the role really shouldn't change. And Rudy Gobert changes a lot of things. Not getting out and defending the enough tonight was a bit of a concern for the Wolves, no doubt.
Yeah, and it was something they struggled with at times last year too. We'll finish off here with a couple additional takeaways. First, though, before we do that, let's talk about our title sponsors of tonight's postcast. And that is, of course, our friends at Prize Picks. If you took Anthony Edwards over on points tonight, I'm sure you did well over at Prize Picks. Same thing with, I don't know, any number of random Jazz players. Jordan Clarkson, three-pointers made over. The great thing about Prize Picks is it's not just points, rebounds, assists. You could take 3-point field goals made, steals, etc. And it's really easy. You just pick 2 to 5 players, pick the categories you want to play, and then you pick whether they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection. You can win up to 10 times your money on any entry, and you're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. You can also cross match sports. So you could, I mean, it's on like a Thursday, you could do an NBA game, the TNT game. You could also play the Thursday night football game at the same time and play the over-unders on both of those. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's extremely easy. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up today and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with our promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks gives you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks give you $50. It's that easy. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right. Let's close this out with a couple of other observations. I think it was really important that Kyle Anderson only played a minute in this game. He got injured, back spasms, I think is what the Timberwolves called it, and ended up not coming back in the game. He left after that 1 minute, didn't come back. I thought the rotation was interesting. Naz Reid got his first minutes of the regular season. The Wolves played the first 6 quarters of the season with no Naz Reid, and then he ended up, after the Towns foul trouble in the third quarter, getting in the game. But I thought it was interesting that he didn't play a little bit more, that Chris Finch stuck mostly with Towns and Gobert together, and then if one was off the floor, he didn't play Naz at the 4 very much. He did a few minutes, I think, in the third quarter, but even with no Kyle Anderson, it was some Taurean Prince at the 4. It was just kind of shuffling lineups a bit, but still not as much Naz Reid as I was expecting.
Yeah, and it mix and match. And Finch is still doing that and doing by feel and using unorthodox. And I love the freedom. Something, and at one point it was Bryn Forbes in the second half, and we hadn't seen him. You're right about Kyle Anderson. He was green in the. It was early. I think it was his first minute, and he walked right off the court. Like he's a problem. Hopefully that is you, and we don't miss a lot of Kyle Anderson's game. His versatility and the way he can guard so many different, big deal for the Wolves. Because like that, when do we go big? Is it more of a Bryn Forbes? Is it a Kyle Anderson kind of answers that question. gives you a lot more flexibility. No prognosis on him just ended, but and healthy is a big deal for him.
Yeah, and Kyle Anderson, I think you were alluding to, kind of bridges that gap between those big and small lineups where he can do all those things because he is that Swiss Army knife. He has that size, that length. He's not, he's not a phenomenal rebounder as a four, but he's able to rebound as a bigger body, and does some of those things that Taurean Prince is a good answer at the four, but he doesn't have quite the same size or passing ability as Kyle Anderson. So that certainly hurt, I think, in this game. And like you said, we don't know what's going to happen. The Wolves play on Sunday in Oklahoma City, so we'll see if he's able to play Sunday. I think the other thing that I thought was interesting from game 1 to game 2 is we saw in the first game, Jaylen Noel actually played some second half minutes at point guard. And I took that to be essentially Chris Finch's way to get a bigger lineup on the floor. And more length and more shooting without Jordan McLaughlin on the floor, and instead putting Noel at point guard. We didn't really see that in this game. I think it's probably because the Jazz played some 3-guard lineups, and really also D'Lo played extremely well in this game, so he played a ton of minutes late. But I thought that was interesting from a rotation standpoint, and also because the rebounding totals ended up being positive in the Wolves' favor. I think both offensive and defensive rebounds. But for stretches of this game, that was a big part of the story of the Jazz getting back in the game and ultimately taking a lead was, again, second chance points, some of those no man's land rebounds and loose balls the Wolves couldn't get to. So I thought, not that Jaylen Noel over, Jordan McLaughlin makes a huge difference on the glass, but I thought it was a little surprising he didn't counter with even more size. But rebounding, I think, is going to be one of those things. Like the Timberwolves struggled last year with it. They brought in the league's best defensive rebounder. And we're 2 games in, but I think everybody was expecting to see a little bit more success on the glass in general for the Wolves.
Well, tonight, because what do you have, 23? He was even more than you would expect on any. But Jaylen Noel was just kind of a bizarre, super fat, and all of it. Life, and it's exciting. And so KC, Anthony Edwards points in the third quarter, and then, or was it had 10? It was either 11 and 10. He did all of the scoring except for Jordan basket right at the third quarter. That is the value of Jaylen Noel. You get a couple more rebounds, and he is a little bit McLaughlin, but the scoring, my goodness. 18 points tonight and 11, just critical stretch in the third where the Edwards and the bench that the back in this game, I have to say, because they were down in the third, they were so flat they actually had to come back. I'm not sure words and explanations and this thing out. That was a bizarre. I heard, so you brought up Jaylen Noel's name. I wish he didn't have to need 10 or 11 straight pointer, but it was that kind of night.
Yeah, and I talk quite a bit about Jaylen Noel on this podcast. I think he's this is certainly a pro Jaylen Noel podcast. I think he's a true 3-level scorer, kind of an interesting blend between D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards in terms of his skill set. So I think the more Jaylen Noel minutes, the better. And he's improved defensively immensely. I think that was one of the reasons he didn't play as much at times last year. But I think in this game, even specifically, I thought he was really getting into the ball quite a bit defensively, and hopefully that leads to more minutes for him. Any other final thoughts at all on this one, Marnie?
Just disappointing. Disappointing because we supposed to be a really, really good Timber. The names and the stats and say that this is going to be a good the schedule that they have through their first. This is where you just toed too many times. Now, if they go if 6-1 to start the season, there are no complaints. But them fumbling their way through the first fine traction, that's a lot of lost opportunity on a schedule here in the first couple of weeks. So disappointing to have not played better. It's disappointing, but I get the big early, and the Wolves, right? They're still going to be just fine.
Yeah, 100%. And we talked about this last time, but the schedule's still really favorable over the next couple of weeks. So yeah, if they go 6-1 in their first 7, going into a tougher part of the schedule, I think we'll look back on this and say, all right, they learned something in these first few games. And, it was an overtime loss. It still could have gone either way. So I think that's definitely good perspective to have. All right, that's all I have for you today here on the Postcast. We'll be back after each and every game with Marnie, and looking forward to Sunday's game against the Thunder. Make sure to follow and subscribe to Locked On Wolves wherever you listen to podcasts, and right here on YouTube for Locked On Sports Minnesota. Make sure you subscribe to that channel as well. Thanks for listening.